My mom picked out a beautiful, mute wife for me. After our lavish wedding, I came home with her. But the moment the front door closed behind us, she spoke, and what she said made me freeze. I've trusted my mom since I was a kid. She always made the right decisions, for both of us. When my dad left us and I was only 6, she took on everything, raising me, supporting us, managing the house. She never complained. Only sometimes, when she thought I was asleep, she'd cry quietly in the kitchen with the tap running, like the sound of water could hide her sobs. But I heard them. And even back then, I promised myself I'd never go against her, that I'd accept any decision she made as the right one. So when I turned 32 and Mom told me she'd found the perfect bride for me, I didn't question it. It's not like I was incapable of meeting women on my own. I'd been in a few relationships. But none of the girls ever passed Mom's approval. One had the wrong hair color, another laughed too loudly, and another didn't speak to her respectfully enough. And every time, I gave in. Mom would never want anything bad for me. I didn't meet my bride until the wedding day. According to Mom, Sarah was an orphan raised by distant relatives in a small town. They hadn't treated her very well, so she'd grown up quiet, obedient, and modest. But what Mom emphasized most was that Sarah had been mute since birth. She couldn't speak at all, only communicated through gestures and writing. Mom said that made her the perfect match for our family. No arguments, no yelling, no drama. The girl would be grateful just to be welcomed into a wealthy family like ours. After all, who else would want a wife with such a flaw? And I'd get a loyal partner who'd listen to every word I said and never talk back. I agreed to the strange arrangement, partly because I wanted a family of my own at last, and partly because I was used to never questioning my mother. Besides, judging by the photo she showed me, Sarah was stunning. A slender girl with long chestnut hair, big blue eyes, and a soft, almost shy smile on her delicate face. I was intrigued, and I said yes to the wedding. Mom planned the big day down to the minute. I wore an expensive custom-made suit, styled my hair the way she liked it, and stood at the altar waiting to meet my bride. The country club she'd chosen for the ceremony was packed, over 200 guests, many of whom I barely knew, all gathered to celebrate our marriage. Mom insisted on such a crowd. "We have to show people that everything's great in our family," she said. "Let them see you're a successful man who can provide for a big household." Then the doors opened, and I saw my bride for the first time. Sarah looked even more beautiful than in the picture. Her white dress hugged her figure perfectly, and a long veil partly covered her face, adding a touch of mystery. She walked slowly and gracefully, eyes downcast like a modest bride should. During the ceremony, she didn't say a word. She just nodded at the right moments and signed where needed. The guests were charmed by her modesty. Some even wiped away tears, touched by the scene. Mom was beaming with pride, soaking up congratulations from all sides. The reception was loud and full of laughter. Sarah sat next to me, smiling politely at the guests but never joining the conversations. When someone spoke to her, she either nodded or scribbled a short reply in the little notebook she always carried with her. Everyone admired her beauty, her modesty, her gentle manners. I felt pride swell in my chest. Mom had really known what she was doing when she chose her to be my wife. After the party, we headed to our new home, a spacious apartment in an upscale neighborhood that Mom had helped me buy. During the taxi ride, Sarah stared out the window, occasionally glancing at me with a soft smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I felt content. Not in love, exactly, but content. I liked this quiet, beautiful girl who was now my wife. We walked into the apartment. I closed the door behind us and turned to Sarah, ready to show her our new place. And that's when everything changed. Sarah looked me straight in the eyes, and the words that came out of her mouth flipped my entire world upside down. "Finally, just the two of us, Michael. We can drop the act now." Her voice was clear and bright, not a trace of any speech disorder. I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. What? How? You're supposed to be mute, I stammered, completely stunned. Sarah smirked, kicked off her high heels, and sank wearily into an armchair. Mute? No. That was your mother's idea. She said you needed a quiet, obedient wife who wouldn't get in the way of your perfect little bond with her. But I'm afraid I have my own plans. I couldn't move. My brain refused to process what was happening. Mom couldn't have done this. She couldn't have lied to me about something so huge. And Sarah, who even was she? Who are you, was all I managed to whisper, feeling the ground slipping out from under me. Oh, that's a long story, Sarah said, unfastening the tight collar of her wedding dress. But we've got the whole night ahead of us, and I'm so tired of pretending to be a mute little doll. I can't wait to tell you the truth. She stood up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains closed. Then she turned to face me, and in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Determination. Anger. Satisfaction. Did your mother never tell you about me? About our family? About what happened 25 years ago? I silently shook my head, still too shocked to grasp any of this. Well then, Sarah sighed, listen carefully. This story started long before either of us was born. And you need to hear every detail if you want to understand why I'm here, and what comes next. I sank onto the couch, my knees trembling. Sarah sat across from me, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Was it pity? Disgust? You really think your father just left you too? Ran off with another woman, like your mom always said? That question hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course Dad left us. I remembered how Mom cried, how she said he'd found someone younger, prettier. That he didn't want the burden of a family anymore, didn't care about a little boy who needed him. I'd grown up with that story, with that pain, with that wound. Yes, I said, clenching my fists. He abandoned us. Sarah shook her head, a strange smile forming on her lips. No, Michael. Your father didn't leave you. He would never have done that. He loved you more than anything. How would you know? I snapped, anger rising in my chest. You couldn't possibly know what went on in our family. I do, she said quietly. Because your father was my mother's brother. He was my uncle. Her words stunned me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That meant Sarah was my cousin. But why had Mom never told me? Why had she introduced Sarah like a complete stranger? If you're my cousin, then why have I never heard of you? Why did Mom make it seem like you were no one? Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Because your mother did everything she could to erase our family from your life. After what she did to your father, it was in her best interest to make sure you never knew. What did she do to him? I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Sarah walked over to her purse, pulled out a small photo, and handed it to me. In it was a young man who looked strikingly like me, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize and a little girl. That's your father, she explained. And my mom, his sister. And me, when I was 5. This was the last picture we ever took together, just a week before he disappeared. Disappeared? But Mom said he left us for another woman, I said, confused. No, Michael. He didn't leave. He went missing. That day, he was headed to a business meeting, and he never came back. A week later, they found his car at the bottom of a lake. But no body. The police assumed he drowned and the current carried him off. I stared at the photo, unable to tear my eyes away from his face. He looked so much like me. It was the same face I saw in the mirror every day. But what does my mom have to do with this? Why are you saying she was involved? Sarah took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something difficult. Your parents co-founded a tech startup. It was doing incredibly well back then. They were partners, but the majority of the shares were in your dad's name. After he disappeared, everything transferred to your mom. She became the sole owner. And you know what's strange? Just days before your father vanished, she changed her insurance policy to include a massive payout in the event of his death. I felt the blood drain from my face. That couldn't be true. Mom would never have done something like that. She always said she loved him. She mourned him. That's a lie, I said firmly. You came into my home, pretended to be mute, married me under false pretenses, and now you're trying to smear my mother's name. Why? Sarah smiled, but her expression was icy cold. I came for the truth, Michael. And for justice. My mother spent years trying to prove your mother was behind my uncle's disappearance. But she never found the evidence, only suspicions. She died 5 years ago, still searching for answers. Now it's my turn to finish what she started. I stood up, fury boiling inside me. Get out of my house. I'm not listening to this madness. Sarah didn't move. Calmly, she reached into her bag and pulled out another item. It was an old, worn notebook. This is your father's journal. He kept it during the last few months before he disappeared. Your mom didn't know it existed. My mother kept it hidden all these years. Read it. Then decide whether I'm lying. She placed the journal on the table and headed for the door. Where are you going? I asked, confused. Don't worry, I'm not leaving for good, Sarah said with a smirk. After all, I'm your lawful wife. I'm just giving you some time alone, with your father's words. I'll be back in a couple of hours. And by the way, don't bother calling your mom. Not yet. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left alone, staring at the worn-out notebook that might hold answers to questions I never even thought to ask, until now. I sat there for a long time, unable to bring myself to touch it. My thoughts tangled into chaos. Could Mom really have had something to do with Dad's disappearance? No. That was impossible. She had always been my example of honesty, strength, and integrity. She raised me on her own, poured everything she had into making me a decent man. She couldn't have done anything wrong. But what if Sarah wasn't lying? What if my whole life had been built on a lie? At last, I reached out and opened the notebook. I flipped to the first page and began to read. March 15th. Fought with Elizabeth again today. She's pushing for more control over the company, but I can't give it to her. Not now, not when I suspect she's working behind my back with competitors. Michael drew a picture of our family today. Such a bright kid, reminds me so much of myself at his age. I hope I can protect him from everything going on around us. I turned the page, my heart pounding faster. March 20th. Elizabeth has been acting strange. She locks herself in the home office a lot, whispers on the phone. Yesterday I saw her meeting with Bob at a cafe. She claimed it was a coincidence, but I saw them exchange some documents. Bob, our biggest competitor. That coincidence doesn't feel like one at all. I kept reading, and with each page, my chest tightened. Dad wrote about how Mom became more secretive, how he found odd documents pointing to backdoor deals, how she began insisting on increasing his life insurance. April 10th. Got a strange message from an anonymous source today. Someone claims Elizabeth is planning to get rid of me. Sounds insane, but after everything I've discovered lately, I can't ignore even the wildest warnings. I'm thinking about sending Michael to stay with my sister for a while, until I sort this out. The final entry was written the day before Dad disappeared. April 15th. I found proof Elizabeth's been working with competitors behind my back. She's selling info on our developments, on our strategy. I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. I want to start divorce proceedings and protect Michael from all of this. I can't live with someone I no longer trust. I'm scared for my life, but even more scared for my son. If anything happens to me, Karen must know, Elizabeth is dangerous. She cannot be allowed to gain full custody of Michael. I closed the notebook, tears streaming down my face. I recognized his handwriting, it was the same I'd seen in birthday cards and notes he gave Mom. And those words, they were so real. So full of love for me, and fear for my safety. Could it really be true? Could Mom have played a part in his disappearance? Had everything I believed about our family been a lie? I grabbed my phone, ready to call her, demand answers. But something stopped me. Sarah had told me not to contact her, not yet. And maybe she was right. If Mom really was involved, that call might alert her, give her time to cover her tracks. I decided to wait for Sarah to come back. I needed to know more, to understand what had really happened to my father, and what role my mother played in all of it. Time dragged by like an eternity. I kept rereading the journal, searching for mistakes, inconsistencies, anything to prove it was fake. But deep down, I already knew it was real. His fears, his love for me, his suspicions about Mom's betrayal, it all rang painfully true. Finally, the door opened and Sarah walked in. She had changed into simple jeans and a t-shirt, her wedding makeup washed off. She looked younger now, more natural. "You read it?" she asked, glancing at the open journal in my hands. I nodded, unable to speak. "And? What do you think?" She sat down beside me, and I caught a soft trace of her perfume. "I don't know what to think," I admitted. "It looks like my father's handwriting, and what he wrote feels honest. But that doesn't prove my mom had anything to do with his disappearance. Maybe it really was just an accident." Sarah nodded, like she'd expected that reaction. "I understand your doubts. My mom didn't want to believe it either, not at first. But over time, the evidence kept piling up. She even hired a private investigator who spent years collecting information." She pulled a folder from her bag and handed it to me. "These are the PI's reports. Copies of documents. Statements from people who saw your mom meeting with strange men not long before your dad vanished. There are also financial records showing how she took full control of the company, and how she used the life insurance payout." I took the folder but didn't open it right away. Inside, I was torn, part of me wanted the truth, but another part was terrified that truth would shatter everything I believed in. "Why did you marry me?" I asked, looking her in the eyes. "If you knew all of this, if you really believe my mother's a killer, why become part of our family?" Sarah didn't look away. "Because it was the only way to get close enough to find real proof. Your mother's careful. She doesn't make mistakes. But she has one weakness, you. She adores you. You're the only person she truly cares about. And I knew that staying close to you was the only way I'd learn what no one else could." "You used me," I said bitterly. "Yes," she replied without a hint of apology. "Just like your mother used me, presenting me as a mute little doll so you'd marry me without question. We all use each other, Michael. The only real question is why." "Then why are you doing this?" I asked. "For justice," Sarah said firmly. "My uncle was a good man. He loved you more than anything. He deserves the truth to come out. The people responsible for what happened to him need to pay." I opened the folder and started going through the documents. Photos of my mother with stern-looking men I didn't recognize. Bank statements showing suspicious large transfers just days before Dad disappeared. Copies of the insurance policy and the ownership transfer of the company. Witness statements about secret meetings. It all painted a terrifying picture. Could my mother, the woman I saw as a saint, really have been involved in my father's death? "But it's all circumstantial," I said, closing the folder. "There's no direct proof she had anything to do with it." "You're right," Sarah nodded. "That's exactly why I'm here. I believe the final piece of evidence is still in your house, hidden in her personal things, in documents she's kept locked away. And now that I'm your wife, I can get close enough to find it. I stood up, anger building in my chest. You want to use me to dig through my mother's things? To look for evidence against her? And you seriously think I'll help you? Sarah stood too, her expression hardening. I think you want the truth just as much as I do. I saw the way you read your father's journal. The way you looked at his photo. Deep down, you're already questioning everything. You're asking the kind of questions you never dared to ask before. And I'm giving you a way to get the answers. I said nothing, because she was right. After reading that journal, after seeing those documents, I couldn't just dismiss it all. I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed everything. What do you want to do? I finally asked. Tomorrow your mother's throwing a dinner party to celebrate our wedding, she said. We'll go. We'll play the perfect newlyweds. And when the moment's right, I'll slip away and search her home office. And if she catches you? She won't, Sarah replied confidently. I know how to stay invisible. And your mom will be too busy showing off her perfect daughter-in-law to notice a thing. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to defend my mom, kick Sarah out, and forget all this madness. But another part, the one already filled with doubt, needed to know the truth, no matter how awful it might be. I'll think about it, I said at last. Right now, I just need to be alone. Sarah nodded, understanding. Of course. I'll take the guest bedroom. Don't worry, I won't impose more than necessary. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door, but paused in the doorway. Michael, I know this is a shock. But remember, your father loved you. He wanted to protect you. And I think he'd want you to know the truth. With that, she left me alone with my thoughts, and my doubts. I spent the night wide awake, rereading my father's journal and combing through the documents the detective had gathered. The more I read, the more my doubts grew. The image of my mother, the one I'd carried in my heart all my life, began to crumble like a house of cards. I thought back to my childhood, to the few times Mom talked about Dad. Always bitterly. Always with a sharp reminder of how he betrayed us, left us for someone else. I grew up hating him, resenting him. But what if I'd spent my whole life hating a man who loved me more than anyone? A man who might have been murdered, by his own wife. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was going to help Sarah find the truth. Not because I believed her, but because I needed to know. If Mom was innocent, then the search would prove it. But if she wasn't? I couldn't even bring myself to imagine what I'd do then. The dinner party was set for 7 p.m. Mom lived in a large house outside the city, one she bought a few years after Dad's disappearance. I had always thought it was the reward of her hard work, the success of the company. But now I couldn't help but wonder if it was luxury built on my father's blood. Sarah was ready by 5. She wore an elegant evening dress and subtle makeup. I noticed she brought the little notebook again, the one she was supposed to use to write her responses throughout the evening. Part of our lie, part of the act. Have you made your decision? She asked as we got into the car. Yes, I said. I want the truth. But if I find out you're lying to me, that this is just some twisted attempt to ruin my mother. I'm not lying, Sarah cut in. I want to be sure too. If your mother is innocent, I'll be the first to admit it. But everything I've seen points the other way. We drove in silence. My mind raced with thoughts of seeing Mom again. How would I look her in the eyes, knowing I suspected her of something so dark? How would I smile and play the role of the happy newlywed while my insides churned with fear and uncertainty? Mom met us at the door, beaming. She hugged me tight, kissed both my cheeks, then turned to Sarah and embraced her too, with a warmth that now felt suspiciously fake. My darlings, I'm so happy to see you. How was your first night in the new home? Everything okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Sarah smiled and signed a few gestures, which, surprisingly, Mom seemed to understand. Yes, sweetheart, I hope you'll be very happy too, she replied to Sarah, then turned to me. Michael, you look tired. Are you alright? Yeah, Mom. Just didn't sleep much, I said, doing my best to sound normal. A lot going on these past few days. Of course, honey, that's perfectly normal, she said with a smile. Come in, the guests are already arriving. The living room was packed with people, many of them familiar faces from the wedding, Mom's business partners, her friends, a few distant relatives. Everyone smiled, congratulated us, and couldn't stop talking about the sweet, mute girl who, according to them, was the perfect match for me. I played my part. I smiled, thanked them for their kind words, and held Sarah's hand. She was flawless, too, modest smile, a few graceful gestures that passed for sign language, and occasional short notes scribbled in her notebook. Mom was glowing, as always. Elegant, confident, she was the life of the party, the perfect hostess, the loving mother. Watching her like this, it was hard to believe she could have had anything to do with my father's death. But then I remembered Dad's journal, his fears, his suspicions. And the doubt crept back in. After dinner, Mom suggested the guests move to the conservatory, where a dessert table had been set up. Sarah leaned in close and whispered. Now. Keep her busy for a few minutes so I can slip into her office. I nodded, my heart pounding in my throat. I walked over to Mom and took her arm. Mom, can I talk to you for a second? There's something I wanted to ask. Of course, sweetheart, she said with a smile. What is it? I led her to the far end of the conservatory, catching a glimpse of Sarah quietly slipping out of the room behind us. I just wanted to ask, what do you really think of Sarah? I began, scrambling for ways to stretch out the conversation. Are you happy with your choice? Mom lit up. Oh, Michael, she's perfect. So modest, so obedient. And it's clear she absolutely adores you. I'm so glad I found her for you. How did you find her? I asked, suddenly realizing I'd never asked that question before. You said she was an orphan, raised in a small town. But how did you even hear about her? For a moment, her expression shifted, just a flicker of unease in her eyes. But she quickly regained her composure. Through some acquaintances, sweetheart. You know how many connections I have. Someone mentioned a girl who was looking for a better life, and I got curious. At first, I thought she might work as a house assistant. But when I saw how pretty she was, and so quiet, I thought, maybe she'd make the perfect wife for you. And I think I was right, wasn't I? She smiled again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Yeah, of course, I nodded, feeling the tension tightening inside me. Do you happen to remember her maiden name? I saw it on the paperwork when we got married, but I didn't really pay attention. Mom frowned slightly. Why do you ask, Michael? What does it matter what her name used to be? She's a Thompson now, just like you. I'm just curious, I shrugged. Trying to get to know my wife better. I think it was Wilson, or something like that, she said vaguely. Honestly, I don't remember. Why? Didn't she tell you herself? How could she? I reminded her. She's mute. Oh, right, of course, Mom said quickly. Well, you can ask her to write it down. Anyway, sweetheart, I think we should get back to the guests. It's rude to leave them waiting. She turned toward the room, and just then I saw Sarah quietly slipping back into the conservatory. Our eyes met. She gave me the smallest nod. She'd found something. The rest of the evening passed in heavy anticipation. I could barely focus on the conversations around me, my mind constantly racing with thoughts of what Sarah might have found in Mom's home office. Finally, the guests started to leave, and we said our goodbyes. Mom hugged me tightly, and for a brief moment, I thought she held on just a bit longer than usual, like she could sense something was off. Be happy, my darlings, she said, looking from me to Sarah. "And remember, I'm always here if you need anything." We got into the car, and as soon as the house disappeared from view, I turned to Sarah. "Well? What did you find?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive. I copied files from her computer. It was on, and luckily, there was no password. I guess she didn't expect anyone to sneak into her office during the party. I didn't have time to go through everything, but I found a folder named David. "That's your father's name, right?" I nodded, feeling a tightness in my chest. David, the name Mom barely ever said out loud, and when she did, it was always with bitterness or anger. What was in the folder? I don't know. It's password protected. But I'll break through the encryption when we get home. I've got tools for that. We drove in silence, each lost in thought. I kept replaying the look on Mom's face when I asked about Sarah's last name. She definitely tensed up, even if she tried to hide it. And what was that slip? Didn't she tell you herself? Like she forgot, for a second, that she'd introduced Sarah as Mute. Once we were home, Sarah went straight to the computer and began working through the files. I watched her, amazed at how effortlessly she handled the tech, how fast her fingers moved across the keyboard. "You're definitely not some girl from a small town," I said. "Where'd you learn all this?" Sarah gave me a quick glance. "My mother was a programmer. She taught me a lot. And after she died, I kept learning on my own. I had to become good at a lot of things to carry on her mission." "Her mission? You mean finding evidence against my mother?" "Yes," she replied simply, her eyes still on the screen. "It became the purpose of my life, to find out what really happened to Uncle David." I looked at her, this beautiful, brilliant, determined woman who had become my wife under false pretenses, who had used me to get what she needed. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Maybe because I was starting to understand her. Maybe because I, too, needed the truth. "Almost there," Sarah said after a while. "The encryption's weak. Just a couple more minutes, and we'll see what's inside." I sat down next to her, tension building in my chest. What would we find? Proof that my mom was innocent, or undeniable evidence that she was involved in my father's disappearance? "There," Sarah said finally. "We're in." The folder opened, revealing dozens of files, photos, documents, text notes. Sarah started opening them one by one. The photos showed my dad in different situations, at work, at home, with me. Some were clearly taken without his knowledge, like someone had been following him. The documents turned out to be reports from a private investigator who had been tailing him in the months before he disappeared. They detailed his every move, every meeting, every conversation. "Your mother was watching him," Sarah said quietly. "She knew everything he did." I sat in stunned silence. Why would Mom need to track Dad like that? Was it jealousy, like she always claimed, or was there something else? The last file in the folder was a text document titled Plan. Sarah opened it, and we both froze as we read its contents. It was a detailed plan to eliminate my father. Dates, locations, names of people to be hired. The amount of money needed. And the final line. "After David is removed, the startup is fully mine. Michael stays with me. No contact with David's family." I felt nausea rising in my throat. This couldn't be real. My mother, the woman who raised me, who always spoke of honesty and integrity, couldn't have planned the murder of her own husband. My father. "This could be fake," I said, turning away from the screen. "Someone could have planted those files on her computer." Sarah shook her head. "Look at the creation dates, Michael. Most of these files are over 20 years old, created right after your father disappeared. And they've been updated regularly. The last update was just a few months ago. This isn't fake. It's an archive. Your mother's been keeping it all these years." I stood up, my legs weak beneath me. I needed air, needed to step outside, clear my head. But then the doorbell rang. Sarah and I locked eyes. It was almost midnight. Who would come at this hour? I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. I froze. It was my mother. "Michael, open up, it's me," she called. "I know you're home, I can see the lights on." I turned to Sarah, silently asking what to do. She quickly shut all the files, turned off the computer, and gave me a quick nod. "Hi, Mom," I said, opening the door. "What are you doing here so late?" She stepped into the apartment, her eyes scanning the room with an unsettling attentiveness. "Just wanted to check in on you too," she said as she walked into the living room where Sarah was seated. After the party, I had this strange feeling. Like something was off. She looked at Sarah, and something flickered in her eyes, something I'd never seen before. Suspicion? Hostility? "Where's Michael?" she asked Sarah, as if she'd forgotten Sarah was supposed to be mute. Sarah looked at her in surprise, then at me, still standing by the door. Mom followed her gaze, and when she saw me, she seemed momentarily flustered. "Oh, there you are, sweetheart. Sorry, I'm a little scattered after the evening." I stepped into the living room, feeling the tension in the air grow heavier with every second. "Mom, everything's fine, really. We were just getting ready for bed." Of course," she nodded, but made no move to leave. Instead, she sat down in the armchair directly across from Sarah. "I just wanted to be sure everything's alright. A mother's instinct always knows when something's wrong." She kept her eyes locked on Sarah, and I saw Sarah straighten slightly, as if bracing herself. "You know, Michael," Mom began, never breaking eye contact with Sarah, "I've always done everything for your sake. Always protected you from harm, from anyone who could hurt you." "I know, Mom," I said, my heart beating faster. "You've always been there for me." "And I always will," she nodded. "Even if it means making hard decisions. Even if it means getting rid of people who threaten our happiness." Her words hung in the air like a blade, and a chill crept down my spine. Was she talking about my father? Or Sarah? Sarah stood up, like she was ready for whatever came next. Mom stood too. They faced each other, like two predators just before a strike. "You know, Michael," Mom said, still staring Sarah down, "I've always been able to sense when someone's lying. And right now, I know something's wrong. Your wife, she's not who she claims to be." "What are you talking about, Mom?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew. "She's not mute," Mom snapped. "And I don't think it's a coincidence she ended up in your life. I think she has an agenda." Sarah smirked, and to my surprise, she spoke. "You're right, Elizabeth. I do have a goal. To find proof of what you did to my uncle." Mom didn't even flinch at hearing her voice. It was as if she'd expected it. "So that's what this is," she nodded. "You're from David's family. I should have guessed sooner. But who are you?" "He didn't have any children besides Michael." "I'm the daughter of his sister," Sarah replied. "Karen Johnson. The same Karen David planned to send Michael to, right before he disappeared." A flicker of color drained from Mom's face, and I knew Sarah had struck a nerve. "Karen was always a problem," Mom muttered through clenched teeth. "She never understood what was best for David. And clearly, she raised a daughter just as stubborn and foolish as she was." "You killed him," Sarah said flatly. "And we're going to prove it." Mom laughed, but it was cold and hollow. "Prove it? With what? You have nothing. You never did, and you never will." "We have David's journal," Sarah said. "His fears, his suspicions about you. And now we have the files from your computer." Mom's eyes shifted to me, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before, shock and fury. "You let her go through my things? My computer? You betrayed me, Michael. I want the truth, Mom, I said quietly. The truth about Dad. What really happened to him? The truth? Mom echoed, her voice hardening. The truth is, your father was weak. He built the startup but didn't have the guts to run it the way it needed to be run. He wanted everything to be honest, noble. But business doesn't work that way, Michael. Business is about strength and will. And when he realized I was willing to do whatever it took for success, he got scared. He wanted to walk away, take you with him, strip me of everything. So you killed him? Sarah asked. Mom smiled, and it was a smile far more terrifying than any scream. I protected my interests. And yours. Because of me, you grew up in comfort, got the best education, became a successful man. What would have happened if David had taken you to live with his sister? A life in the middle of nowhere, no future, no chances. I stared at her, unable to recognize the woman in front of me. This cold, calculated person wasn't the mother I thought I knew. Or maybe I'd never seen who she really was. So you admit it? I asked, my voice trembling. You're admitting you killed my father? She stepped closer, reached out to touch my face, but I pulled away. I did what I had to do, Michael. For us. For our future. And I won't let anyone, especially some girl from the past, tear apart what I've built for the last 25 years. She turned sharply to Sarah. And you, little girl. Remember this. I don't go down without a fight. If you think you can bring me down, you're wrong. Smarter people have tried. Where are they now? One of them, my uncle, is at the bottom of a lake, Sarah shot back. And my mother? Dead too. A strange car crash, 5 years ago. That was you, wasn't it? Mom didn't answer. But the look in her eyes said enough. Something inside me broke. This woman, my mother, was capable of murder. Not just of my father, but of his sister too. And who knows who else. Leave, Mom, I said quietly. Leave. And don't come back. She stared at me, genuinely shocked. You're choosing her? That liar? Over me, the woman who gave up everything for you? I'm choosing the truth, I said. And if what you told me tonight is the truth, then I want nothing to do with you. Mom stood tall, her eyes turning icy. Fine, Michael. You've made your choice. But remember, I always get what I want. And no one, not even my own son, will stand in my way. She turned toward the door but stopped just before crossing the threshold. And Sarah, your mother thought she could prove I was guilty too. Right up until the moment her car went off that cliff. Think about that. With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Sarah and I stood frozen in the living room, stunned by everything that had just happened. She confessed, Sarah said quietly. She practically admitted to killing your father, and my mother. I nodded, unable to speak. My mother, a murderer. And the worst part was realizing she felt no guilt, no remorse. What now? I finally managed to ask. Do we have enough evidence? Is there anything we can actually do? Sarah walked over to the computer and turned it on. The files I copied, there's enough in them to get the police interested. And her confession, even if it wasn't direct. I just wish we'd recorded the conversation. She didn't say it outright, I pointed out. She spoke vaguely, carefully. She could deny everything. And I don't even know if those files would be admissible, they were obtained illegally. Sarah paused, thinking. You're right. We need more. Something that directly connects her to your father's disappearance. I collapsed onto the couch, feeling completely drained. What if there is no such evidence? What if she covered her tracks so well there's nothing left to find? Sarah sat down beside me and took my hand. Then we'll find another way to get justice. I'm not giving up, Michael. Not after everything I've learned. Not after coming this close to the truth. I looked at her, this brave, determined woman who had come into my life under false pretenses but brought the truth with her. Painful, horrifying truth, but still truth. I'll help you, I said. No matter what it takes, I want the truth about my father to come out. And I want my mother. I want Elizabeth to answer for what she's done. Sarah tightened her grip on my hand. We'll do this together, she promised. For your father. For my mother. For everyone she's hurt. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed in the living room, going through the files, discussing what to do next. Sarah told me about her childhood, how her mother never believed David's disappearance was an accident, how she dedicated her life to finding the truth. Mom always said your father was special, Sarah told me. Kind, honest, principled. She said he adored you. Kept your photos in his wallet, showed them to everyone. When he disappeared, she tried to get custody of you. But your mom used her influence, her connections, and the court sided with her. Why didn't she ever try to contact me? I asked. At least after I grew up. She did, Sarah sighed. When you were 16, she sent you a letter. But it was returned, marked refused by recipient. And when she tried to approach you after school, there were security guards around you. I vaguely remembered how, in high school, I was often picked up by large men my mom called security, supposedly because of her public status. Your mother did everything she could to cut you off from your father's side of the family, Sarah continued. It benefited her. You were her trump card. Her proof that everything was fine. A successful businesswoman. A devoted single mother. Her life looked perfect. Who would ever suspect her of murdering her husband? By morning, we had a plan. We needed undeniable proof of her guilt, something that couldn't be explained away as coincidence or hearsay. And for that, we'd need to get back inside her house. Her personal papers. Her past. It's dangerous, Sarah warned. She knows we suspect her now. She'll be on guard. I know, I nodded. But we have no choice. We need that evidence. We decided I'd reach out to my mom, pretend I regretted our argument, say I let my emotions get the best of me. That would give us a way back in, to get close again, to access her home and her documents. Sarah would continue playing the role of the soft-spoken, remorseful wife. We agreed to tell Mom that Sarah had panicked after realizing just how powerful and influential she was, and that she'd confessed everything to me. I'd say I convinced her to leave the past behind. It was a risky plan, but we had no other choice. That same day, I called Mom. As expected, her tone was cold and guarded. "What do you want, Michael?" she said instead of hello. "I want to talk, Mom," I replied, trying to sound sincere. "I've thought a lot about everything overnight. And I realize I wasn't fair to you." "Really?" she said, full of skepticism. "And what about all those accusations? All that so-called evidence your wife dug up?" "I handled it," I said. "She got scared, Mom, when she understood who you really are, how powerful you are. She thought she could find something against you, but now she knows that was stupid, and dangerous." "And you believed her?" Mom scoffed. "After everything she's done?" "She's my wife," I said. "And I have to give her a chance. Just like you always taught me, to forgive when someone truly regrets what they've done." Mom was silent for a moment, and I could practically feel her weighing my words, dissecting them for hidden meanings. "Fine," she said at last. "Come over tonight. Both of you. We'll talk." "Thank you, Mom," I exhaled, the relief in my voice entirely real. "We'll be there at 7. When I hung up, Sarah looked at me, clearly uneasy. "She agreed too easily," she said. "It feels off." I know, I nodded. But we don't have a choice. This is our only chance to get closer. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Sarah rehearsed her part as the quiet, remorseful wife. I practiced my lines, my explanations, my apologies. By evening, we were ready, at least physically. Emotionally, I felt wrecked. I was about to look into the eyes of the woman I'd idolized my whole life, knowing she was a killer. I would have to smile at her, hug her, tell her I loved her, all while searching for proof of her crimes. Mom met us at the entrance of the mansion, as elegant and composed as ever. She hugged me, but it was cold and formal. She only nodded at Sarah, not even bothering to hide her distrust. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I've made dinner." We followed her to the dining room, where a table was set for 3. Mom poured wine into our glasses and raised a toast to reconciliation and new beginnings. We clinked glasses. I noticed that Sarah only sipped hers lightly, barely touching it to her lips. Mom, on the other hand, drained her glass in one go and immediately poured herself more. The conversation was stiff. Mom asked about my job, our future plans. I answered, trying to sound normal, though every word felt fake. Sarah stayed quiet, only replying when necessary. We kept up our act, but I could tell, Mom wasn't buying any of it. After dinner, she suggested we move to the living room. We sat there, trying to maintain the strained conversation, when suddenly she stood up. "You know what, kids," she said, flashing a tight, unnatural smile. "Since we're starting fresh, let's celebrate with some champagne. I have a beautiful vintage down in the wine cellar." She walked out, and as soon as the door closed behind her, Sarah turned to me. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "She's acting strange." "I know," I said. "She doesn't believe us. But this is our shot. While she's in the cellar, we can look around." "No," Sarah shook her head. "It's a trap. She left us alone on purpose, to see if we'd go snooping." I realized she was right. Mom was far too clever to make obvious mistakes. If she left us alone, it was for a reason. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We can't just sit here and wait." "That's exactly what we have to do," Sarah said firmly. "Sit and wait. Show her we're really here to make peace, not to snoop." We stayed in the living room, making small talk, just in case Mom was listening. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the door opened and she walked in, carrying a bottle of champagne and 3 flutes on a tray. "Here I am," she said with a smile, but I saw the disappointment in her eyes. She had expected to catch us digging through her things. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting." "No, Mom," I replied. "We were just chatting. Talking about how to set up the apartment." "Lovely," she nodded, pouring the champagne. "To new beginnings." We toasted. This time, Sarah emptied her glass too. Mom watched her with a faint smile that I didn't like one bit. We sat in the living room for about another hour, keeping up the charade. Mom talked about her plans for the company, some upcoming projects. I nodded, pretending to care. Sarah stayed quiet, her expression distant, like her mind was somewhere else. Finally, Mom glanced at the clock. "It's getting late," she said. "Maybe you two should stay the night. There's plenty of space." "Thanks, Mom," I said. "But we should get back. Sarah has a doctor's appointment in the morning." "Doctor?" she asked, and something flashed in her eyes. "Is it serious?" "No, just a routine checkup," I said quickly, realizing my slip. There were no doctors in our cover story. "I see," Mom nodded, but I could tell she'd caught the lie. "Well then, I won't keep you." We said goodbye. I noticed again that Mom hugged only me, ignoring Sarah completely. Once we were in the car and pulling away from the estate, Sarah turned to me. "She's trying to divide us," she said. Can't you see how differently she treats you and me? She wants you to feel like you have to choose. I know, I nodded. It's her favorite tactic. And it always used to work. But not this time. As we drove, I noticed Sarah didn't look right. She was pale, her eyes slightly unfocused. Are you okay? I asked, starting to worry. I don't know, she said weakly. I feel off. Dizzy. Maybe it's the champagne. I guessed. You barely ate at dinner. Maybe, she murmured, but I could see she was getting worse. By the time we got home, Sarah could barely stand. I helped her inside, guided her to the bedroom. She collapsed onto the bed, breathing heavily. Something's wrong, she whispered. It's not just the champagne. I can feel it. I can't. Her eyes fluttered shut. She passed out. I grabbed my phone to call an ambulance, but just then, the doorbell rang. Without thinking, I opened it. Mom stood on the doorstep, that same strange smile on her face from earlier in the evening. Forgot to give you dessert, she said, holding out a small box. How's Sarah? Feeling worse already? I froze, the meaning behind her words sinking in. What did you do? I asked, horror rising in my chest. What did you do to her? Mom stepped inside calmly and closed the door behind her. Nothing serious, Michael. Just a little sleeping agent. She'll be out until morning. Might feel a bit foggy after, but she'll live. As long as you behave. You drugged her, I whispered in disbelief. Your own daughter-in-law. Your son's wife. Don't be dramatic, she said, waving it off. I just needed to talk to you. Alone. And you left me no choice when you insisted on going home. She walked into the living room and sat down in an armchair. So, she began as I followed her in, I know you don't trust me. I know you and that girl are up to something. And I'm here to offer you a deal. A deal? I repeated, still trying to grasp what was happening. Yes, a deal, she nodded. You dropped these ridiculous accusations. Stop digging for the truth about your father. Divorce Sarah and forget she ever existed. In return, I leave her alone. I won't hurt her, just like I didn't tonight. I'll let her walk away and live her life. And if I say no? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mom smiled, and it was the kind of smile that was worse than any threat. Then I'm afraid your wife might have an accident. Just like her mother. Just like your father. I stared at the woman I had called Mom all my life and didn't recognize her. Had she always been like this? Cold. Calculating. Capable of murder. You won't get away with this, I said quietly. Not this time. I will, she said confidently. Just like I always have. I have power, money, connections. And what do you have? Stolen files that won't hold up in court. An old journal that could have been written by anyone. That's not enough, Michael. And you know it. She stood up and came closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. I pulled away instantly, unable to bear her touch. Think about my offer, she said. For your wife's sake. For your own. Some secrets are better left buried. With that, she turned toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. By the way, it was a double dose. If she doesn't get medical help soon, she might not wake up. The antidote's with me. Think fast, Michael. The door closed behind her, and I was left standing there, paralyzed with horror and helplessness. Sarah was dying in the next room, and I had no idea what to do, who to call, how to help her. I ran to her side and checked her pulse. It was weak, but steady. She was still breathing, though shallowly. I tried to wake her, shook her gently, called her name, nothing. Call an ambulance. But what would I say? That my mother poisoned my wife? They'd think I'd lost my mind. And if Mom was telling the truth about the antidote, the doctors might not even know what she'd used. They might not be able to help. I was frantically thinking through my options when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Hello. I answered, barely able to hold the phone with my shaking hands. Michael, this is Gregory Parker, came a deep male voice. Sarah's father. Her father? I echoed, confused. But Sarah said her parents were dead. I'm her adoptive father, the voice clarified. After Karen died, I became her legal guardian. Listen carefully, we don't have much time. I know what happened. I know about the poisoning. Your mother did the same thing to Karen 5 years ago. We didn't get there in time. But this time, we're ready. Who are you? I asked, still trying to understand what was going on. How do you know about the poisoning? I was your father's business partner, Gregory said. I helped Karen with her investigation. After she died, I kept going. We knew your mother might try something if she ever found out who Sarah really was. So we prepared. How did you get my number? How did you know she'd been poisoned? You're not the only one who came prepared, he said. Sarah had a transmitter. A tiny device sewn into her clothes. She could activate it if she ever felt in danger. She did that tonight, right after the first symptoms hit. So what now? I asked, deciding to trust this stranger. I didn't have any other options. Someone's on their way to you now, Gregory said. A doctor. Someone who knows exactly what to do. He'll be there in 10 minutes. After that, you and I are going to have a long talk, about your father, your mother, and what has to happen next. I agreed. I would do anything. Anything to save Sarah. 10 minutes later, just as Gregory had promised, the doorbell rang. A short, gray-haired man stood on the doorstep, holding a medical bag. Where is she? He asked without introduction. I led him to the bedroom, where he immediately began examining Sarah. He pulled out vials and syringes from his bag and started preparing an injection. Is that the antidote? I asked. Something like that, the doctor nodded. Your mother uses a specific mix, a combination of sedatives and a few other agents. We know the formula, and we know how to counter it. He gave Sarah the injection, then hooked her up to an IV filled with a clear fluid. Now we wait, he said. She should start getting better within the hour. I sat next to Sarah, holding her hand, feeling her pulse gradually strengthen, her breathing grow deeper, steadier. An hour later, just as the doctor said, she opened her eyes. Michael, she whispered, struggling to focus. What happened? Mom poisoned you, I said, gripping her hand tighter. But you're okay now. They helped you. She tried to sit up, but the doctor gently held her back. Rest, Sarah, he said. You need to regain your strength. Dr. Lewis, she said weakly, recognizing him. You're here. Your father sent for me, he nodded. You activated the transmitter, and we responded immediately. I watched them, still trying to process everything I'd been pulled into. Who were these people? How were they connected to my father, to Sarah? And what did they know about my mother? What did I still not know? I need to explain to Michael, Sarah murmured, trying to lift herself again. He deserves to know everything. There'll be time for that, Dr. Lewis said gently. Right now, you need rest. Gregory will be here soon. He can explain. I left the bedroom, leaving Sarah in the doctor's care, and walked into the living room. My head was spinning, too many questions, too much shock, the overwhelming realization that my mother had truly tried to kill my wife. Just like she'd killed my father. The doorbell rang again, snapping me out of the fog. I opened it to find a tall man with silver hair and sharp gray eyes. I knew instantly, this was Gregory Parker. "Hello, Michael," he said as he stepped inside. "We finally meet." I let him in and we sat across from each other in the living room. I studied him, trying to figure out who he really was, what part he played in my father's life, in Sarah's, and possibly in mine. "Who are you?" I asked directly. "I was your father's friend," Gregory said. "We started our business together, partners from the very beginning. But I left when I realized I couldn't work with your mother. She thought I was weak and indecisive. I thought she was ruthless and unethical. David and I stayed close, though we saw each other less after that. Elizabeth didn't approve of our friendship. I looked closely at him, searching for any sign of deception, any reason not to trust him. But all I saw was weariness, and honesty in his eyes. "Tell me about my father," I said. "What was he really like? Not the version my mom gave me, but the man you knew." Gregory ran a hand through his graying hair. His eyes grew distant, like he was staring into a memory. "David was a brilliant scientist and engineer," he began. "But more than that, he was one of the most compassionate people I've ever known. He could spend hours buried in a complex technical problem, and then just as easily spend the evening on the floor building blocks with you. No person was ever too small for him. No problem too trivial. Every person mattered to him. Every question deserved his attention." Gregory fell silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "He was loyal," he said finally. "Loyal to his principles, to his friends, to his family. Even to Elizabeth, despite all her complexities. He saw something in her no one else did. He believed that beneath all the ambition and hardness, there was still a good person. And she betrayed that trust," I said quietly. Gregory nodded. "Unfortunately, yes. It started small. David was too honest for the business world, especially back then. He refused shady deals, bribes, anything even remotely unethical. Elizabeth began making moves behind his back. At first, it was just signing contracts without telling him. Then she started using more creative methods to get what she wanted." "When did he find out?" I asked. "It was gradual," Gregory replied. "But everything came into focus about 6 months before he disappeared. He found documents proving Elizabeth was selling proprietary technology to competitors, technology David had spent years developing. His own invention. His legacy." I tried to imagine what my father must have felt in that moment. Realizing that the person closest to him had betrayed not only his trust but everything he stood for. "Why didn't he leave her then?" I asked. "Why didn't he take me and file for divorce?" "Because of you," Gregory said simply. He was afraid that if they divorced, Elizabeth would use her connections to win full custody. Even back then, she was already powerful. And part of him still hoped he could fix things. That he could talk to her, make her see she was going too far. "But he couldn't," I said. "No," Gregory shook his head. "Elizabeth wasn't going to change. On the contrary, she grew more ruthless, more ambitious. And when David finally decided to act, prepared divorce papers, gathered evidence of her fraud, it was already too late." He paused, as if hesitant to go on. "Were you in touch with him that day?" I asked. "The day he disappeared?" "Yes," Gregory nodded. "He called me in the morning. He sounded anxious. Told me he had found something, proof not just of industrial espionage, but that Elizabeth might have been involved in the death of a rival. Someone who had threatened to expose her schemes." A chill ran down my spine. Had it started that long ago? Had my mother already been capable of murder back then? "David said he was going to see his lawyer," Gregory continued. "And afterward, he was planning to pick you up from preschool and take you to his sister, Karen. We were supposed to meet later that evening to talk about next steps. But he never showed up. And after that? I asked. Did you suspect my mother right away? Of course, Gregory nodded. But I had no proof. The police found David's car at the bottom of a lake, but there was no body. They decided he must have lost control of the car, crashed into the water, and the current carried his body away. The perfect accident. But you knew it wasn't, I guessed. Yes, Gregory said. David was a skilled driver. He knew that stretch of road like the back of his hand. And that morning, he told me someone was following him. That he'd seen the same car tailing him for several days. And you told the police about this? Of course, Gregory said with a bitter smile. But by then, Elizabeth already had influence. Without a body, without concrete evidence, my suspicions sounded like the ramblings of a paranoid man. They listened politely, and sent me on my way. He let out a deep sigh, and I could see how painful these memories were for him. What happened after? I asked. Did you try to reach me? To tell me the truth? Many times, Gregory nodded. But Elizabeth did everything she could to cut you off from your father's past. You moved to a different neighborhood, you went to a new school. Whenever I tried to get close to you, security would show up. And eventually, Elizabeth got a restraining order against me. A restraining order? On what grounds? I asked, stunned. She convinced the court I was harassing you both. Said I was mentally unstable, obsessed with conspiracy theories, Gregory said bitterly. Then Karen, David's sister, stepped in. She didn't believe the official version of his death either. She started her own investigation, trying to uncover Elizabeth's involvement. What did she find? I asked, feeling my heartbeat quicken. A lot, Gregory nodded. She uncovered ties between Elizabeth and men with criminal backgrounds. Found witnesses who'd seen suspicious meetings. Discovered strange financial transactions, right before David disappeared, and right after. She tried to contact me too, didn't she? I guessed. Yes, Gregory confirmed. But with the same result. Elizabeth kept such tight control over you, it was impossible to break through. He paused, collecting his thoughts. And then I came into Karen's life, he continued. We joined forces in the search for the truth. And over time, we grew closer. We got married. And we raised Sarah together, Karen's daughter from a previous marriage. I glanced toward the bedroom, where Sarah was now recovering from the poisoning. My cousin. My wife. The woman who had entered my life pretending to be a mute, obedient doll, all to find proof against my mother. And nearly paid for it with her life. What happened to Karen? I asked. A car accident, Gregory said, his voice shaking. 5 years ago. She was driving home late at night. The road was empty. Officially, they said she lost control and went off a cliff. Another tragic accident. But you knew that wasn't the truth, I said. Yes, he nodded. The day before, Karen called me. She was nervous, she said she had finally found solid proof. A direct link between Elizabeth and the people who may have orchestrated David's disappearance. She was going to the police. The next day, I got a call from the hospital. I could see how hard it was for him to talk about it. Even after all these years, the grief was still fresh. And that's when you and Sarah decided to try something different, I said. Yes, Gregory confirmed. Direct accusations didn't work. Elizabeth was too smart, too cautious, too powerful. We had to get inside her world, find evidence from within. And Sarah volunteered. How? I asked. How did she manage to convince my mother to choose her as my wife? We'd been monitoring Elizabeth for years, Gregory explained. We knew her routines, her preferences, her plans. We knew she wanted someone quiet, submissive, someone who wouldn't interfere with her relationship with you. And Sarah became that woman. She got a job at the charity foundation Elizabeth sponsored. That's where they met. And Mom believed it? I asked, incredulous. She didn't suspect anything. Sarah's a gifted actress, Gregory said with a small smile. And the idea of her being mute? Brilliant. Elizabeth loved the thought of a daughter-in-law who literally couldn't argue with her. Someone who'd be grateful just to be welcomed into the family, despite her supposed flaw. I shook my head, still struggling to believe any of this was real. My world, once so clear, so solid, was falling apart right in front of me. The mother I had loved and respected turned out to be a cold-blooded killer. The woman I had just started to know as my wife was my cousin, playing her own secret role. And the father I barely remembered wasn't a weak man who abandoned his family, he was a victim of his wife's betrayal, trying to protect me until his last breath. So what now? I asked once I managed to gather my thoughts. What are we supposed to do with all this? With this truth? Gregory looked at me closely. That's for you to decide, Michael, he said seriously. You're David's son. His blood, his legacy. You're the only one who can choose what to do with the truth we've fought so hard to uncover. I didn't answer. Part of me wanted to run, to bury this horrible truth, to go back to the comfortable illusions I had lived in all my life. But another part, stronger, more honest, wanted justice. It wanted to make sure my father's death didn't stay in the shadows. That my mother faced the consequences of everything she'd done. I want her to be held accountable, I said at last. I want the truth to come out. But how? Do we even have evidence strong enough to hold up in court? Gregory thought for a moment. There's nothing that directly proves she killed David, he admitted. And we may never have that. Too much time has passed. But we do have a voice recording on your father's old phone, Elizabeth threatening him. We have financial records showing suspicious activity before and after his disappearance. We have witnesses who saw her with questionable people. Is that enough? I asked, unsure. Maybe not, Gregory said. But there are other crimes. Karen's death. The attempt on Sarah's life last night. If we can gather solid proof for even one of those, we can finally bring her down. At that moment, Dr. Lewis stepped out of the bedroom. Sarah's awake, he said. She's weak, but she wants to speak with both of you. Gregory and I exchanged a glance and headed into the bedroom. Sarah was propped up on pillows, pale but clear-eyed. When she saw us, she gave a faint smile. Did you tell him everything? She asked Gregory. Yes, he nodded. Michael knows the truth. And he's ready to help us get justice. Sarah turned to me. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know how hard this must be, for you to find out that someone you've loved your whole life isn't who they pretended to be. I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand in mine. You don't have anything to apologize for, I said. You risked your life to uncover the truth. To fight for justice. If anyone should be sorry, it's me, for being blind to everything that was happening around me. Sarah squeezed my hand gently. You're not to blame, she said firmly. Elizabeth did everything in her power to keep you in the dark. The fact that you're willing to face the truth now, that already means everything. So what do we do next? I asked. Gregory says we may not have enough evidence. Sarah exchanged a glance with Gregory, and I noticed a silent understanding pass between them. We have a plan, she said. But it's risky. And we'll need you, Michael. Me? I asked, surprised. What can I do? You're the only one Elizabeth trusts, Sarah explained. The only one she doesn't see as a threat. And the only one who can get her to confess. I looked at her, starting to grasp what they were asking. You want me to get a confession out of her? I said slowly. Yes, Sarah nodded. We'll equip you with a recording device. You'll meet with her, tell her you agree to her terms, that you'll divorce me, drop all suspicions. But before you do, you want the truth. The whole truth about what happened to your father. And if she doesn't confess? I asked. What if she senses a trap? There's always a risk, Gregory admitted. But it's a risk worth taking. This is our only real shot at justice. I thought it over. What they were proposing was dangerous. My mother wasn't naive. She was sharp, calculating, and cautious. If she even suspected I was playing her, who knew what she'd do? But they were right. This might be the only chance we'd get. And I couldn't let it slip away. For my father, for the truth, for justice, I had to try. All right, I said finally. I'll do it. I'll talk to her. I'll try to get her to confess. Sarah smiled, and in her eyes, I saw hope. Thank you, she said softly. This means more than you know. Not just for us. For you, too, Michael. For your future. For your freedom from the lie you've been living all these years. I nodded, knowing she was right. As painful as the truth might be, it was better than the most comforting lie. And I was ready to face it, whatever it looked like. We began preparing for the operation. Gregory contacted his team to set up the technical side, microphones, hidden cameras, communication systems. Sarah, still weak from the poisoning, helped me get ready for the conversation. She coached me on what to ask, how to steer the dialogue without raising suspicion. I called my mother the next day. Told her I'd thought about her offer, that I wanted to talk. She agreed to meet without hesitation, which didn't surprise me. She'd always believed she could convince me, that in the end, would see things her way. That overconfidence was her weakness, a blind faith in her control. We arranged to meet that evening at her house. I insisted on coming alone, without Sarah. Told her we needed to talk in private, about the future. She agreed, though I could hear tension in her voice. She didn't entirely trust my sudden desire for reconciliation. Before I left, I put on a special shirt fitted with a hidden microphone and a tiny camera embedded in a button. The equipment was top of the line, undetectable during a casual search. Gregory and his team would be nearby, listening in, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. Sarah hugged me before I left, tight, like she was afraid it might be the last time. Be careful, she whispered. She's dangerous, especially when she feels cornered. I know, I said. But I have to do this. For my father. For your mother. For all of us. She pulled back, searching my eyes. For us? She asked softly, a bit surprised. Yes, I said firmly. We started this together. We finish it together. Something flickered in her eyes. Hope. Warmth. I couldn't quite tell, but it was real. And deep. Good luck, she said simply. And come back. Promise me you'll come back. I kissed her on the forehead and left, feeling a strange sense of calm. As if all the fear and doubt had stayed behind, and ahead of me was only the path I had to walk. The path to the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. My mother's mansion greeted me with silence and shadows. Normally, the house would be full of people at this hour, security, staff, assistants. But tonight, it felt like we were alone. That unsettled me. Still, I tried not to let it show. Mom met me in the living room. As always, she was elegant, composed, every hair and detail perfectly in place. But in her eyes, I saw something new. Caution. Suspicion. Or maybe, fear. Michael, she smiled as she stood to greet me. I'm so glad you decided to come. She hugged me, and I hugged her back, trying not to think about the fact that these very arms may have once given the order to have my father killed. Sit down, she offered, motioning to the chair. Would you like something to drink? Wine? Whiskey? No, thanks, I said, shaking my head. I want to keep a clear head for this conversation. She nodded, poured herself a glass of red wine, and sat across from me. So, she began, locking her eyes on mine, you said you'd thought about my offer. What did you decide? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Everything depended on how convincing I could be in the next few minutes. I agree, I said, keeping my voice firm. You were right, Mom. This marriage was a mistake. Sarah isn't who she claimed to be. She used me, manipulated me. I don't want to be a part of her games anymore. She smiled, but I could tell she was still on edge. I'm glad you finally see things clearly, sweetheart, she said. I always knew you'd understand one day that I only want what's best for you. But before we closed that chapter, I went on, carefully choosing each word, I need to know the truth. The whole truth. About what? She asked cautiously. Everything, I said. About you. About Dad. About what really happened 25 years ago. She froze, and I caught the flicker of alarm in her eyes. But she quickly regained her composure. Why does it matter, Michael? She asked, setting her glass down. The past is irrelevant. What matters is what's happening now, and what comes next. It matters to me, I said firmly. I need to know who I've been all these years. Was I the son of a traitor who abandoned his family for another woman? Or was I something else? Something you've never told me? She stared at me for a long time, as if deciding whether it was worth the risk. Finally, she stood, walked to the bar, and poured herself more wine. What exactly do you want to know? She asked as she returned to her seat. Everything, I said, my voice steady. Starting with whether Dad really was the traitor you always said he was. Did he really leave us for another woman? Mom let out a dry chuckle and shook her head. No, she finally said. There was never another woman. That was a story I made up, for you, for everyone else. A legend that explained his disappearance and justified my sudden grief. Then what really happened? I asked, my heart pounding in my throat. She took a sip of wine, her gaze drifting somewhere past me. Your father was an idealist, she began. Honest. Principled. Too honest for the time we lived in, for the world we were part of. He wanted to run the business by the book, clean, transparent. But that's not how you survived. You had to make deals, grease the right palms, bend the rules when necessary. And you started doing that behind his back, I guessed. Yes, she nodded. Small things at first. Then bigger. Then came the opportunity to sell some of our technology to competitors. Nothing critical, of course, just parts that wouldn't hurt the company. But it was for a lot of money. And Dad found out, I said, finishing her thought. He did, she confirmed. He found the documents, proof of the deals. He was furious. Said he'd file for divorce, take you with him, push me out of the company. He wanted to tear it all down. Everything I had built, for us, for our future. And you couldn't let that happen, I said quietly. She looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether I was truly ready to hear the rest. No, she said at last. I couldn't. So I did what I had to do. To protect us, the company, our future. You killed him, I said flatly, locking eyes with her. And then something happened that I didn't expect. She didn't deny it. Didn't act offended or call me crazy. She just nodded, once, calmly, as if confirming something obvious. Yes, she said. I had him taken care of. Not with my own hands, of course. I had contacts, people who could do it cleanly, without a trace. I stared at her in disbelief. She had just confessed, so easily, without pressure or fear, to murdering the man I'd spent my whole life thinking had abandoned us. She had killed my father. How? I asked, the nausea rising in my throat. How did it happen? Easier than you think, she shrugged. A minor car malfunction, a bit of alcohol in the system, a dark road by the lake. A tragic accident, like so many others. What about the body? I asked. Why was it never found? Because it wasn't meant to be, she replied. We made sure of that. No body, no murder. Just a missing person and a very convenient accident. I looked at her, this woman I'd called Mom my entire life, and all I saw was a cold, calculated person willing to do anything to achieve her goals. And you never regretted it? I asked. You never felt guilty? Mom paused, as if that question was harder than all the others. Sometimes, she said at last. In the early years, when you'd ask about him, when you cried at night calling his name. But then I'd remind myself I did it for you, for our future, and the doubts would disappear. For me. I repeated, fury rising in my chest. You killed my father for me. A man who loved me, who wanted to protect me. That was for my good. Yes, she answered firmly. Look at your life, Michael. You had everything, the best schools, the best universities, opportunities most people only dream of. And all of that was because of the decision I made 25 years ago. If David had taken you to live with his sister like he planned, what would you be now? A small-town kid with no future, no chances. But I'd have had my father, I said quietly. A man who loved me enough to risk everything to keep me safe. She waved that away like it was irrelevant. Love doesn't pay the bills, Michael, she said. Love doesn't open doors or build futures. Money does. Power. Influence. And I gave you all of that, at the cost of one necessary decision. I stared at her, unable to reconcile the woman before me with the one who used to read me bedtime stories, kiss my scraped knees, beam with pride at my school awards. How could she be both the loving mother I remembered, and a cold-blooded killer? And Karen? I asked. Dad's sister. Were you responsible for her death too? She didn't even flinch. Yes, she nodded. Karen was always a problem. Stubborn, relentless, too much like her brother. She never bought the official story about his death. She spent years digging, asking questions. And 5 years ago, she found something. Something that could link me to David's disappearance. So you solved that the same way, I said. It was a necessary step, she said coldly. Self-preservation. She threatened everything I'd built. Everything that mattered, for both of us. And Sarah? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Did you try to poison her yesterday? Of course, she said without a trace of guilt. She was a threat. She came into our lives under false pretenses, looking for evidence against me. I couldn't allow that. And if I hadn't agreed to the divorce, you would have let her die, I said. I would have done what needed to be done, she replied evasively. Just as I always have. But now that you've come to your senses, there's no need. You'll divorce her, she'll disappear, and we'll move on like none of this ever happened. I looked at her, stunned. And you think I'm just going to accept this? I asked. That I'll live with the knowledge that you killed my father, his sister, and tried to kill my wife, and do nothing? She shrugged. What can you do, Michael? She asked with a faint smile. You have no evidence. None. Just the word of a girl who faked being mute and a man who's been chasing ghosts for 25 years. Who would believe them over me? A respected businesswoman, philanthropist, public figure. Slowly, I unbuttoned the collar of my shirt, revealing the hidden microphone beneath. Now we do have evidence, I said calmly. Your confession. Recorded, documented. Ready for court. Mom froze. Her expression shifted, disbelief, then shock, and finally, rage. You, she started, but didn't finish. At that moment, the doors to the living room burst open. Several people entered. I recognized Detective Anderson, the one Gregory had introduced me to the day before. Behind him were uniformed police officers. "Elizabeth Thompson," Detective Anderson said, holding up his badge, "you are under arrest for the suspected murders of David Thompson and Karen Johnson, as well as the attempted murder of Sarah Johnson. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mom stared at me with such venom in her eyes that I instinctively took a step back. I had never seen that expression on her face before. It was like the mask of the loving mother had finally slipped, revealing the predator underneath, cornered, but still dangerous. "You'll regret this, Michael," she hissed as the officers snapped the handcuffs onto her wrists. "You think you've won? That you've proven something? You know nothing about the real world, boy. How it works. How to survive in it. I'll get out, sooner or later. I have money, power, influence. And when I do, you'll understand what it means to betray me." I watched as they led her out of the room, out of the house, and all I felt was emptiness. No relief, no victory. Just a hollow ache. As if a piece of me was leaving with her. A part I'd known and loved for years. A part that had defined who I thought I was. Detective Anderson approached and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "You all right?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. "That couldn't have been easy." "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know if I'll ever be all right after this." He nodded with quiet understanding. "Wounds like this don't heal overnight," he said. "But you made the right choice. You chose the truth, no matter how painful it was. That's the first step toward healing." I gave him a faint, grateful smile. "What now?" I asked. "What happens next?" "We'll press charges," the detective replied. "She'll go to trial. And with the evidence we have now, especially her own confession, she won't walk free." I nodded slowly, still struggling to believe it was all real. That my mother had been arrested for murder. That everything I thought I knew about my life was built on a lie. "Can I go?" I asked. "I want to go home. To Sarah." "Of course," Anderson said. "We'll be in touch if we need anything else." I left the house, got into my car, but didn't start it right away. I sat there, staring at the mansion where I'd grown up, where I had been raised by a woman who turned out to be a monster. So many memories were tied to that place. So many moments that felt happy, genuine. And all along, she had known. Known that she'd killed my father. Known that everything we had was built on blood and lies. Finally, I started the car and drove home. Back to Sarah, to Gregory. To the people who had risked everything for the truth. For justice. For me, even when they didn't truly know me. Sarah was waiting on the couch, tense and silent. When I stepped in, she rose, but didn't move toward me, like she wasn't sure she had the right. "Did it work?" she asked softly. "Did you get the confession?" "Yes," I nodded. She admitted everything. "My father, your mother, the attempt on your life. And they arrested her. Right there in the living room." Sarah closed her eyes, and I saw tears spill down her cheeks, tears of relief, of long-held pain finally released. "Finally," she whispered. "Finally, justice is done." I walked over to her and took her hands in mine. "You were right," I said. "About everything. From the beginning. And I'm grateful that you didn't give up, that you didn't walk away, even when it got dangerous. Because of you, I finally know the truth. Painful. Awful. But the truth." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with emotion and unspoken words. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly, feeling her warmth begin to fill the emptiness left behind by my mother's arrest. I didn't know what the future held. I only knew that I wouldn't live in lies anymore. That I would face whatever came next with open eyes, no matter how hard it might be. What now? I asked. What happens to us, me and you? Sarah stepped back and looked me in the eyes. I don't know, Michael, she said honestly. I came into your life with a purpose. And that purpose has been fulfilled. Elizabeth has been arrested, she's facing charges. The justice we've been chasing is closer than it's ever been. And our marriage? I asked. It was part of the plan. What happens to it now? Sarah lowered her gaze. That's up to you, she said quietly. We can get divorced, if that's what you want. Go back to our separate lives. Or. I prompted gently. Or we could try to actually get to know each other, she finished, lifting her eyes to mine. No lies. No roles. No hidden agendas. Just two people who've been through something big, together. I looked at her, this strong, determined woman who risked her life for justice. Who never gave up, never backed down, even in the face of danger. And I realized that somewhere in these past days, she had come to mean something to me. I want to try, I said. I want to get to know the real Sarah. And I want you to get to know the real Michael. Let's see where that takes us. She smiled, and in that smile, I saw hope. Then let's start over, she said. Hi, I'm Sarah Johnson. And I'm definitely not mute. I laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. A real, honest laugh. Hi, Sarah Johnson. I'm Michael Thompson. And I'm really glad to meet you. Just then, my phone rang. It was Gregory. She's called in a lawyer, he said without introduction. One of the best in the country. And she's prepared to fight. So are we, I said firmly. We have the recording. We have the evidence. We have the truth. She's not escaping it this time. It won't be easy, Gregory warned. She's powerful. She has money, connections. This could drag on for years. Then we'll fight for years, I replied. As long as it takes. For my father. For Karen. For justice. When the call ended, Sarah looked at me with concern. Are you ready for this? She asked. For the long fight. For her to come after you with everything she has. She'll try to destroy you, like she did with everyone else who stood in her way. I'm ready, I said with certainty. Because now I know the truth. And I won't let lies shape my life anymore. We stood by the window, looking out at the pale light of dawn. Ahead of us was a long road, legal battles, emotional scars, setbacks, and pain. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking in the right direction. Choosing truth, no matter how bitter it was. Honoring the memory of a father I never got to know, but who loved me until his final breath. And beside me stood Sarah. The woman who helped me finally see the truth. The trial of Elizabeth Thompson became one of the most high-profile cases of the decade. Just as Gregory had predicted, she fought with everything she had. She hired the best attorneys, leveraged her connections, and tried to discredit the witnesses, including me. Her defense relied on several key arguments. First, she claimed the recording made in her home was obtained illegally, without a court warrant, and therefore inadmissible as evidence. Second, even if the court accepted the recording, she insisted her words were said under emotional distress and didn't reflect the truth. Third, she argued that too much time had passed since my father's disappearance, making it impossible to determine what had really happened. But we had our own trump cards. A recording from my father's phone, where she directly threatened him. Testimonies from people who had seen her meeting with suspicious individuals shortly before he vanished. Financial records showing large, unexplained transfers around the same time. And, of course, the attempted poisoning of Sarah, proven by medical tests and Dr. Lewis's testimony. The trial lasted over a year. Every day in that courtroom was a test. Watching my mother behind bars, listening to her deny everything, paint herself as the victim of a conspiracy, try to manipulate the court and public opinion, it was torture. But I didn't give up. For my father. For justice. For the truth. I was willing to endure whatever it took. Over the past year, we really got to know each other, no lies, no masks, no hidden agendas. What started as a marriage on paper slowly turned into something real, a deep friendship built on mutual respect, support, and love. Gregory became an important part of my life too. He told me about my father, what kind of man he was, how he dreamed of a future for me, how much he loved me. Those stories helped me build an image of the father I barely remembered. Helped me understand what I truly lost the day he disappeared. And then there was the business. The company my parents had founded was now under my control. Even while under investigation, my mother tried to hold on to power, using trusted proxies. But with the help of legal counsel and testimony from my father's former partners, I managed to prove my rightful claim to the inheritance. And now I could run the company the way I believed my father would have wanted, honestly, transparently, with respect for every employee. Finally, after months of hearings, interrogations, and expert evaluations, the court reached its verdict. Elizabeth was found guilty of orchestrating the murder of David. Of the murder of Karen. And of the attempted murder of Sarah. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with no possibility of early release. As the judge read the sentence, I looked at my mother. She stood tall, head held high. There was no remorse in her eyes, only cold fury and, perhaps, surprise that she hadn't managed to twist her way out of it like before. As they led her out of the courtroom, our eyes met one last time. And in that moment, I saw something new. Not hatred. Not anger. But something that looked like respect. As if she was acknowledging that I, her son, had become a worthy opponent. That I had beaten her at her own game. 5 years had passed since the trial. Life was slowly but surely getting back on track. Sarah and I divorced, but we stayed close friends. She met Patrick, a surgeon at the city hospital. They had a daughter and named her Karen, after Sarah's mother. I became her godfather and often visited their cozy home on the edge of town. Getting back to normal after everything with my mom turned out to be harder than I'd expected. Years of therapy helped me deal with the trauma of betrayal, but real healing came when I least expected it. I met Chloe at a conference. She owned a rival company. Our first meeting ended in a heated argument about patents. The second? Coffee at a little cafe around the corner. And the third, a candlelit dinner. Her strength, sincerity, and warmth completely disarmed me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could trust again. Gregory became the father I had lost. We often got together, him, me, Sarah and her family, Chloe. He shared stories about my dad, helped me with the company, and was simply there when I needed him. Together, we built a new kind of family. Not bound by blood, but by something even more important, honesty, mutual respect, and deep connection. We'd been through hell and back, but we managed to hold on to who we were. And the best part, there were no more secrets between us. In our new family, there was one simple but sacred rule: no matter how bitter the truth might be, it was always better than the sweetest lie.